Steelhouse Lane sits quietly in the centre of Birmingham, close to the movement and noise of Corporation Street, yet just far enough removed that it passes unnoticed. A place people move through rather than stop, unaware of what has occupied this ground for centuries. It is an unremarkable stretch at first glance, bordered by modern buildings and the steady rhythm of city life. But beneath that surface is a continuity that has never really broken. This has always been a place where people were brought when something in their lives had gone wrong. A place of holding, of containment, and of transition, where individuals were taken out of the ordinary flow of the city and placed behind walls that served a very specific purpose. That sense of removal is still present, even now, in the way the building sits slightly apart from the pace of everything around it, as though it belongs to a different rhythm entirely. In the early 18th century, that purpose took the form of a parish workhouse, established in 1734 to house those who could not support themselves. It was part of a wider system designed not simply to provide shelter, but to control and organise. Those who entered were no longer independent. Their lives became structured, governed by routine, discipline and necessity. Families were often separated, work was enforced, and daily existence was reduced to a set of conditions that left little room for personal agency. It was not unusual for people to enter such a place and remain there for long periods, sometimes for the rest of their lives, their identity gradually becoming secondary to their place within the system itself. As Birmingham grew, so did the pressure on institutions like this. The addition of an infirmary marked a shift, not in purpose, but in complexity. Illness spread easily through dense populations, and during the 19th century, when outbreaks of cholera and other diseases moved through the city, places like this became central to the response. The sick were brought in, treated where possible, and often died within the same walls. There was little separation between care and containment. Those suffering from mental illness were also placed here, categorised according to the limited understanding of the time, and managed in much the same way as everyone else. The result was a place shaped not by a single event, but by accumulation, by decades of human experience concentrated into a confined space, where lives overlapped and ended quietly, often without record beyond a name. Archaeologically, this part of Birmingham reflects that layered history in ways that are not always visible, but can be understood through the development of the site. Early structures were replaced, foundations reused, and the layout of the land adapted to suit new purposes without ever fully erasing what had come before. The transition from workhouse to lockup in the late 19th century was not a break, but a continuation. The physical structures altered, materials changed, and the layout was refined. But the underlying function remained remarkably consistent. The ground itself had become associated with a particular kind of use, and that use persisted even as the buildings above it were rebuilt. In 1891, the Steelhouse Lane lockup was constructed, introducing a new phase in the life of the site. It was designed as a holding facility for those who had been arrested, a place where individuals were kept temporarily before appearing in court. The building reflected its purpose with a clarity that left little room for interpretation. Narrow corridors, solid doors, and rows of cells created an environment that emphasised control and separation. Each space was designed to limit movement, to reduce interaction, and to hold individuals in a state of waiting. Beneath the structure, a tunnel was constructed to connect directly with the Victorian law courts, allowing prisoners to be moved without ever entering public view. It was an efficient system, but also one that reinforced the idea of removal, of taking people out of sight and holding them in a controlled space until the next stage of their lives was decided. This period also coincided with the rise of organised street violence in Birmingham. Groups that would later be referred to as the Peaky Blinders operated in the area, and while individual records are limited, it is highly likely that members of these groups passed through the lockup at some point. The building would have been a steady flow of individuals connected to the changing social conditions of the city, from petty offenders to more serious criminals, all processed in the same way. The details of their lives may have differed, but their experience of this place would have been remarkably similar. As continuity extends into the more recent history, in 1994, Fred West was held at Steelhouse Lane police station. His presence there links the site to one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern Britain. A reminder that the function of the place has never entirely changed. Those brought here are still arriving at a moment when something has gone wrong, still being held within the same physical and institutional framework. The names change, the crimes change, the context changes, but the experience of being brought into this building and held there remains strikingly consistent. Not everyone connected to Steelhouse Lane is remembered in official records. Some remain through anecdote and memory, carried forward in a way that formal history often overlooks. One such figure is Tommy Tank, a man known in Birmingham for his presence in local pubs and his tendency to drift in and out of trouble. His real name is often given as Thomas Larvin, though the details are less important than the impression he left behind. He was known well enough to be recognised, the sort of person who would have encountered the police regularly, and who likely passed through the lockup on more than one occasion. The story most often associated with him is simple, but memorable. It involves a bet made casually in a pub, offering him a drink if he would walk through the streets with a brick balanced on his head. It was not intended seriously, but he accepted and carried it without hesitation, walking steadily through the city with a brick in place. There is something about the image that lingers, not because it is important in any formal sense, but because it captures a moment of personality within a place that is otherwise defined by process and routine. It reminds you that the people who passed through here were individuals, each with their own stories, even if most of those stories have been lost. The more unusual accounts connected to Steelhouse Lane begin to emerge in the 20th century, particularly in the period when Hawkins Wine Bar operated on the site. The building included a cellar, and it was here that one of the most frequently repeated experiences was reported. Staff working in the bar became increasingly reluctant to enter the cellar alone, although no clear reason was initially given. The reluctance developed gradually, based on repeated incidents rather than a single event, and it was only when those incidents began to be discussed that a pattern became apparent. One account describes a member of staff descending into the cellar late in the evening, after most of the customers had left and the noise of the bar above had settled into something quieter and more distant. The steps down were narrow, and the change in atmosphere was immediate but subtle, the kind of shift that is noticed only when you stop and think about it. At the bottom, the space opened out into a low-ceilinged room, with walls that felt closer than they should have been, and a stillness that seemed to absorb sound rather than carry it. They moved across the room, focused on what they had come to retrieve, and for a moment there was nothing to suggest anything unusual. Then, as they reached the far side of the cellar, they heard a sound behind them. It was faint, almost indistinct, and easy to dismiss as something structural. a movement within the building itself. But it came again, and this time it was clearer. A scraping noise, slow and deliberate, coming from the wall at the back of the room. They turned, listening more carefully now, trying to identify the source. The wall was solid brick, with no obvious openings. No pipes or fixtures that might account for the sound. It came again, slightly louder. The same slow, dragging motion, as though something was moving across the surface on the other side. They stood still, waiting for it to stop, telling themselves that there had to be a simple explanation. Something practical, something that could be understood. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then the scraping stopped entirely, and in its place came something else. It was a low sound, uneven and drawn out. Not clearly a voice, but close enough that it suggested something human. It did not form words, and it did not carry in a way that a voice should. But it had a quality that made it impossible to dismiss completely. It was not loud, but it was close, and that closeness made it difficult to ignore. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. They left the cellar without finishing what they had come down for, moving quickly back up the steps and into the relatively normality of the bar above. Later, when the experience was mentioned, others admitted that they had heard similar sounds, sometimes scraping, sometimes the low, indistinct noise, always from the same part of the cellar, and always when they were alone. Inside the lockup itself, the experiences take a slightly different form, less defined, but no less persistent. Visitors moving through the building sometimes find themselves becoming aware of sounds that do not seem to have an obvious source. In one account, a visitor walking along a corridor became aware of a second set of footsteps behind them. The sound was clear enough to suggest that someone was following. But when they stopped, the sound stopped as well. They waited, listening, expecting to hear movement, but there was nothing. When they began to walk again, the footsteps returned, matching their pace closely enough to feel deliberate. This pattern repeated more than once before they turned to look and found the corridor empty. Another account focuses not on sound, but on the atmosphere within one of the cells. A visitor stepped inside briefly, expecting nothing more than a small enclosed space, but immediately became aware of a change that was difficult to define. The air felt heavier, not colder, but more contained, as though the space itself was pressing inwards. They stepped back out, and the sensation lifted almost immediately. Curious, they stepped inside again, and the feeling just returned as quickly. After repeating this once more, they chose not to stay. In the underground tunnel, the experiences are often more collective. Groups moving through the space have described a gradual shift in mood as they progress. A subtle change that becomes more noticeable the further they go. Conversation fades, footsteps slow, and individuals become more aware of their surroundings in a way that is difficult to explain. In some cases, one person will stop without warning, later describing a reluctance to continue. Not based on anything they saw or heard, but on a feeling that moving further was not the right thing to do. When discussed afterwards, others in the group have reported feeling the same hesitation at the same point, despite not having spoken about it at the time. There are also smaller, less defined experiences that occur throughout the building. Brief moments seen at the edge of vision, The impression of someone standing nearby when no one is present. Moments that pass quickly and leave little behind, beyond a sense that something was not quite as it should have been. On their own, they are easy to dismiss, but taken together, they form a pattern that is difficult to ignore entirely. Alongside these accounts, there are stories that attempt to explain what might be happening. Some suggest that the experiences are linked to the long history of the site, to the repeated use of the space as a place of confinement and control. Others offer more specific narratives, involving individuals who may have died there, or events that might have left a stronger impression. These explanations vary in detail and credibility, and while they provide a framework, they are not supported by consistent evidence. They remain part of the folklore of the area, rather than established fact. In the present day, the building stands as a museum, its original function no longer active, but its structure largely unchanged. Visitors move through the same corridors, enter the same cells, and walk the same tunnel that has been used for over a century. Most experience nothing unusual, and leave with an understanding of the building as a historical site. But some leave with something less easy to define. A sense that the space is not entirely empty, that the experiences of the past have not entirely faded. Steelhouse Lane does not present a single defining story. Instead, it offers something more subtle, a series of moments that reflect the long continuous use of the site. It is a place shaped by repetition, by the steady flow of people passing through it under similar circumstances, and by the accumulation of those experiences over time. What remains is not clear, and it does not present itself in a way that demands belief, but it is there in the way people describe their time within the building, in the small details that repeat often enough to form a pattern. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. If you enjoy these stories, you can support the podcast and get access to MP3s and PDF books over on Buy Me a Coffee. They're £1.50 each, or free if you're a member. You can find everything at www.ghosttales.co.uk. and follow on Facebook and Instagram at Ghost Tales Podcast.